So I want to zoom in a little bit on one of maybe the more confusing parts of the meditation, which is the piece of wax passage. Right about halfway through the second meditation, Descartes starts telling a story about a piece of wax which he has in his hand. And he says, oh, it smells of honey and it's hard, it has a certain shape, it's kind of cold. Ooh, but even as he says those things, he has held it near a fire and suddenly it changes. It changes its shape, the odor goes away, it becomes hot, the color is different, and so on and so forth, right? It really changes all of its perceptual qualities. And the question is, why is Descartes telling us this, right? What's the point of the piece of wax passage? Well, I think in order to understand the point of the piece of wax passage, what we really need to do is look at the title of Meditation 2. Right? The title of Meditation 2 is this: Concerning the nature of the human mind, that it is better known than the body. Now, the Cogito passage has told us a lot about the nature of the human mind, but it has not really shown us anything about the mind being better known than the body. Here's a kind of objection that Descartes is previewing, really. I mean, he's supposing that some people will object to everything he's been saying by saying the following thing. By saying, look, Descartes, I mean, that's all very nice, this I exist, and, these ideas about our mental states and so on and so forth. But it's kind of speculative, isn't it? I mean, you first had to completely clear your mind of all prejudices through this method of doubt, and then you have to give some kind of complicated story that maybe the man in the street will have trouble to follow. Meanwhile, what's really clear and certain and really well known is just the stuff we immediately see, right? It's just the stuff we grasp with our senses. Your abstract philosophical reasoning, however fine it may be, can't ever be as clear and certain as the obvious fact that there's a pencil in front of me and that I have two hands and can press on my nose. That's the kind of objection that Descartes thinks will be coming his way. And the piece of wax passage is here to preclude that objection, or to answer that objection, to show that no, nothing is very clear about the body. Definitely not through sensation. If anything is known about the body at all, if there's any clarity about the body, it is through thought, it is through thinking, it is through application of what we find in the mind, not through sensation. It's customary, and we'll talk about it in a later lecture, to sort of distinguish 17th and 18th and sometimes even later thinkers into the empiricists and the rationalists. And that may be kind of simplistic, but it's also kind of helpful, right? The empiricists would be the people who say, well, all knowledge comes from sensation, and the rationalists would be the kind of people who say, no, look, before we can get any knowledge from sensation, we're really going to need some pretty serious, knowledge from pure thought alone, from pure reason, rationalist, reason. Ratio is Latin for reason. In this distinction, when you make this distinction to describe the history of philosophy, Descartes is always going to be placed under the rationalists. And here we are seeing one example why, right? He's absolutely going to argue against people who believe that whatever we get through the senses is our clearest, most basic, most important knowledge. Whatever about abstract philosophy, whatever might be said about abstract philosophy, it's definitely never going to reach that level of clarity, distinctness, certainty. So here's what Descartes says about the piece of wax passage. So he has this piece of wax, and now it has suddenly changed all its properties. Does the same wax still remain? I must confess that it does. No one denies it. No one thinks otherwise. Right? The piece of wax has changed all its sensible properties, but of course it's still the same piece of wax. So what was there in the wax that was so distinctly grasped? Certainly none of the aspects that I reached by means of the senses. For whatever came under the senses of taste, smell, sight, touch or hearing has now changed, and yet the wax remains. So I thought that I grasped the idea of this piece of wax, of this object in front of me, through the senses. But that can't be true, says Descartes. Because although everything sensory about it has changed, I still understand that there's this piece of wax in front of me. My conception of this object, the way that I grasp this object, grasp in a mental sense, right? The way that I grasp, the way that I think of this object, is clearly not in terms of sensory qualities. And therefore the idea of this object, the mental grasp, the intellectual grasp I have of it, can't have been given to me by the senses. Right? Maybe the senses, who knows, maybe the senses can give me the idea of yellow, right? I see yellow, that gives me the idea of yellow, maybe. That's something that I don't think Descartes talks a lot about. It's something that later philosophers might be obsessed with, as we'll probably see when we come to the empiricists. But definitely, Descartes says, the idea that there's an object here, that there is a piece of wax here, that is not a thought, an idea that could come from the senses. Because it turns out that everything sensory is kind of irrelevant to it, right? The taste doesn't matter, the smell doesn't matter, the sight doesn't matter, the feelings of warmth or coldness, the sounds, none of it matters. The only thing that matters is apparently some conception that is independent of these sensory considerations. What precisely is this thing that I thus imagine? Let us focus our attention on this and see what remains after we have removed everything that does not belong to the wax. Only that it is something extended, flexible, and mutable. But what is it to be flexible and mutable? Is it what my imagination shows it to be? Namely, that this piece of wax can change from a round to a square shape, or from the latter to a triangular shape. And here, by the way, imagination means our ability to conjure forth mental images, right? I can see a piece of wax, but I can also sort of close my eyes maybe, and mentally imagine a piece of wax. And I can imagine it going from, round to square, or from square to triangular. I can imagine that. And so Descartes is putting forth the possibility that if it's not sensation that has given me the notion of flexibility and mutability, then maybe it is the imagination that has given me this notion of flexibility and mutability. Right? I just imagine it going from one shape to another, and that's the idea of this piece of wax as something that is flexible and mutable. No, says Descartes, that can't be true. For I grasp that the wax is capable of innumerable changes of this sort, even though I am incapable of running through these innumerable changes by using my imagination. Therefore, this insight is not achieved by the faculty of imagination. Right? If I grasp, if I understand that a piece of wax is something that can be deformed in any which way, well, I can't grasp that through sensation, because I haven't seen it deformed in every possible way. It's also something I can't grasp through the imagination, because I can't imagine it being deformed in any which way. I can't run through all those particular images. I can maybe imagine a couple of them, but I can't imagine all of them. That's just, there are infinitely many, right? I could never do that. But still, I know that it can be deformed in any which way. Not sensation, not imagination. It must be, as Descartes says, it remains for me to concede that I do not grasp what this wax is through the imagination. Rather, I perceive it through the mind alone. It is reason, understanding, thinking, the mind that grasps what the piece of wax essentially is. Now, to be honest, there might be some questions of interpretation here, because we earlier heard that sensation, properly understood, is part of thinking. And now Descartes seems to say that imagination is not the same thing as the mind. What I think he is doing, and other commentators might say something else about it, but what I think he is doing is not so much denying that when I imagine something, this is happening in my mind. It's more that he's pointing out that those are not the capabilities of the mind that are important for grasping the essences of objects. Right? To understand what an object really is, I need abstract thought, I need reason. And so, in order to get at any clear understanding of the physical world around me, I'm going to need to use abstract thought and reasoning. So it's not the case, as the empiricist, the naive empiricist might have thought, that I grasp the objects around me through sensation and that this is especially clear. On the contrary, Descartes says, we now find out that sensation is pretty confused. Right? Through sensation, I can never really grasp what something really is. I need abstract thought, I need reason to do that. And this means that I need to go through the same kinds of thought processes that I just used to, think about the cogito, think about the mind, in order to ever get at a grasp of nature, at a grasp of the bodies, the external world surrounding me. And that's precisely what Descartes is going to do. He's going to consider this question of what is a body really, much more in Meditation 5, where we're going to find out that the body is really just extension in space. Right? It's not really colored, it doesn't really have a flavor, it's just extension in space. That's when we have a really clear grasp, when we really understand what the body is. But we're going to see that all of that is predicated on the first. We need abstract philosophy of that. An abstract philosophy starts with the cogito, with the I think, the I exist, as we have just seen. And so the contents of my mind really are prior, in an epistemological sense. Right? We have to think about that, become aware of that, before we can ever start thinking about a world of external objects. And the idea that sensation gives us a kind of privileged access to a world of external objects, that turns out to be false. Right? Sensation is very useful maybe, but until it is tamed and interpreted by our philosophically schooled mind, it also generates just a lot of confusion, gives us ideas that aren't really true, and in general leads us astray in all kinds of ways. So that's the point that Descartes is trying to make here, by coming up with this example of the piece of wax. So he can conclude at some point that what I thought I had seen with my eyes, I actually grasped solely with the faculty of judgment, which is in my mind. Since I now know, this is the end of the second meditation, since I now know that even bodies are not, properly speaking, perceived by the senses or by the faculty of imagination, but by the intellect alone, and that they are not perceived through their being touched or seen, but only through their being understood, I manifestly know that nothing can be perceived more easily and more evidently than my own mind. But, and now for a moment the fiction of the meditator intrudes again, since the tendency to hang on to long-held beliefs cannot be put aside so quickly, I want to stop here, so that by the length of my meditation this new knowledge may be more deeply impressed upon my memory. Right, this is weird. We have to distance ourselves from sensation. Right, that's something we already saw in the first meditation. That is also the lesson of the second meditation, once again. Distance yourself from sensation. Reason everything through. And then we will get at the truth, including the truth about sensation.